starting with the elderly wolf uncle. Chapter 139. The little wolf cub's eyes were still full of cruelty at the moment, gritting his teeth, and from time to time he wanted to try to break free of the chain. Unfortunately, the chains tied to Laura's body are even thicker than her arms, and even if her powers are not suppressed, she may not be able to break free. Not to mention wearing a collar now. At this moment, Laura's power is completely an ordinary little girl. What about Charles? Logan sighed secretly that the situation was not good, and then looked around, only to find that there was one less person. Grandpa Charles. Taken away by a bald head wearing a black blindfold. Quote. Wanda heard this question and answered weakly. Damn it, what SHIELD wants to do with Charles? When Logan heard that Professor Charles was taken away alone, he suddenly panicked a little. 2.2. Back then, some people thought about using the latter's ability to hunt mutants around the world through the increase of the brainwave enhancement machine. Even at that time, it was almost successful by those people. All mutants were threatened with death. Fortunately, this operation was stopped and unsuccessful. Otherwise, mutants would have gone extinct long ago. They wouldn't be trying to use Charles against Chen, would they? Logan was constantly thinking about this idea. A bunch of garbage, Chen will tear them all to shreds. Laura's eyes flickered, and she was very confident in Chen Tian. Wanda was worried, won't there be any problems with Chen? Pete, as for his part, was immersed in his own fears and did not engage in any topics. He wanted someone to save him now. After making a guess, Logan took a deep breath and looked complicated. If you really want to use Charles to do something, not only Chen, but even we will suffer. Quote. Immediately, he looked helpless and said with a bitter smile, now I can only see Chen, can I come back in time? I didn't expect that in the end, I still had him to clean up the situation. In a word, the expressions on the faces of the two girls fell silent, and the expressions on their faces began to become complicated. If they could, they really didn't want to be a burden to Chen Tian. Boom. Of stabbing. Right at this time, several people in the carriage suddenly heard the sound of something smashing directly in front of the vehicle. Then, the whole carriage shook violently. Meanwhile, there was also a series of sharp brakes, the sound of the wheels rubbing sharply against the ground. Logan could feel that the truck transporting them seemed to stop. What happened? Chapter 97. Chen Tian, Nick Fury, you are too long. Boom. Sting. While Logan and a few children were talking, a violent noise suddenly came from outside the car. Immediately afterwards, the entire carriage shook violently with a series of sharp braking sounds. At this moment, the few people whose hands and feet were all bound had no room to resist, and they swayed with the body. Is it Chen here? Although Wanda's head hit the carriage uncontrollably in the process of shaking, her eyes, which were completely unenergetic, widened expectantly. Except for her, everyone in the carriage thought of this possibility and raised their heads in anticipation. Knowing that the car body stopped steadily, there was a sound of the door opening and closing from the side of the cab, followed by the fierce argument between men and women. Not him. Laura, who originally seemed to smell food and raised her little head and her eyes lit up, immediately lacked interest, returned to her listless appearance, and lowered her head. Pete had been chanting Chen Tian's name, and the latter was originally an extremely terrifying existence in his opinion. But now, he misses each other very much. It seems that people from SHIELD are in conflict with each other and are not satisfied with the current approach, and it seems that this organization is not monolithic inside. Logan, after making sure that the person outside was not Chen Tian, hauled sighed slightly, and then kept thinking of a way to get out. Meanwhile, outside the car, the convoy escorting mutants was stopped by several black SUVs. Agent Hill, led by the latter, looked at the leader of the escort convoy. His eyes were slightly cold, and he asked in a deep voice, I think I have the right to know who is being arrested here. Quote. Of course, Chief Hill, this task was supposed to be carried out by you. The team leader smiled. Now in the carriage are the famous Wolverine, and the experimental subject X-23 of the Akali Transgenic Research Institute. As well as two little guys who are illegally smuggled. Quote. I had clearly warned Nick before. Fury, why did he still do this? When Hill heard the other party's answer, his whole face immediately darkened. When she heard that the escort in the car was such a combination, she immediately understood that SHIELD had attacked Chen Tian. Damn 07, that idiot is really clever. Quote. Hill couldn't help but scold secretly. Obviously, after her contact, it can already be concluded that the mutant Chen Tian is not a person who loves war. Later, Hill also went to find relevant information and learned that Chen Tian's past experience, in many cases, was actively attacked by others. As a last resort, Chen Tian would fight back. All this shows that this powerful mutant teenager is actually a person who is willing to live in peace. But by now, SHIELD has completely been at odds with Chen Tian, right? Nick Fury actually arrested all his companions. When I think of this, Hill couldn't help but take another look and close the wagon of Logan and the others. There was a pang of worry and irritation in my heart. The best strategy to face Chen Tian should be to try to avoid taking the initiative to provoke the other party, and should not move any thoughts without complete preparation. How Nick Fury will be so impatient and completely reckless. I have already told him. Hill's good-looking eyes were suddenly filled with anger, and his brows were tightly wrinkled together. She is a woman who is good at independent thinking and believes in her own opinions. Of course, it also has a strong enough ability. Therefore, he later became a speaker of SHIELD. For Nick, Fury's insistence on going her own way, completely ignoring other people's opinions, filled her heart with unhappiness. Then, that sir, we are now on the mission of the chief. If you have nothing else to do, sir, can we leave? The escort leader looked at Hill's increasingly ugly expression, paused for a moment, and then slowly spoke. After all, although they executed with Director Nick Fury's mission, but Hill in front of him is also a popular figure in xianxia, with many fans, and if they can, these people who do things below do not want to be easily offended. So the attitude of the escort leader showed very well. Yi, I don't embarrass you, go. After hearing the other party's words, Hill exhaled a long breath, and then waved his hand. At the end of the day, regardless of her mood now, whether or not she supports the plans that xianxia is now doing. But Nick Fury, as the director, still has more authority than her. Although Agent Hill is qualified to refuse to carry out the task, he cannot casually intervene and stop the mission that has already begun. As for the entire escort convoy, they were just listening to orders. A lot of things, in fact, they didn't think about it. Hill wasn't interested in embarrassing them. Yes, sir. The escort leader breathed a sigh of relief when he heard Hill let them go. Then he continued to get into the car, drove the vehicle, and continued to pull Logan and the others to continue driving in the direction of xianxia. Nick Fury, all I can say is that I hope you don't regret today's decision. Hill stood where he was, watching the escort convoy slowly drive away. The eyes and mood are indescribably complicated. She always felt, Nick Fury's behavior this time brought unspeakable disasters to the entire xianxia. Chapter 1